All right, so let's talk about the internal analysis, and specifically, let's talk about relevant business unit history, goals and cultures, and those sorts of things that um, will help us understand the organization, especially if we're on the outside looking in. And we'll talk about these in a little bit more detail than we had previously. All right, so information for the internal analysis, types of things that we would like to have that fall under the notion of relative business unit history, goals, cultures, etc., is the, the mission statement, historical and current goals, corporate culture, willingness and ability to adapt to change, what is important to the company, and how important is the business unit to the parent company. All critical aspects, things that we want to discuss. All right, so first we like to start off with the business's mission statement. And very often you can go to either the homepage of the organization, its regular homepage that customers view, or maybe the corporate homepage if it's a corporate thing, and find the business's mission statement. And the mission statement should be relatively simple, 2 or 3 sentences explaining what business they're in and how they plan to compete in that business and what they think is important for them as they move forward in this business. So there are all kinds of examples, and we'll do a lecture a little bit later on specifics of mission statements. But it is important to find a mission statement for an organization. Now, if you can't find that, there are other things that you can do that are pieces of information that might be disguised as business mission statements. So for many organizations, they no longer put a mission statement up, but they have this section on their web page someplace that will be about the organization. And in that, they might typically have a notion of what business they're in and what's important to them and those sorts of things. And so you might be able to find information that is the same as the mission statement, but is not couched as a mission statement. Either one of those is fine, but obviously the mission statement itself would be really good if we can find them. We'd like to know the historical and current goals. Now, in some cases, those are not going to be published, and in many cases, as is the case in our particular situation for many businesses, is that they don't want to give you their current and historical goals. And that is because either they don't have them, or they don't have them written down, or they just don't want to share them. And so in some cases, you have to go back and look at historical data to try to see if you can figure out what is important to the organization in terms of their current goals. Ordinarily when we would think about current goals, they might be sales oriented, they might be a growth oriented goal, they might be a number of new franchises open. There could be a number of different kinds of goals, but it is important for us to be able to identify what their goals are. Then there's this notion of shared corporate value. And that is, what values does the corporation or does the organization share? That is, what are things that the organization finds important? Many years ago, my very first job out of school, I was working for a company called Westclocks. They were the world's largest producer of timepieces. And they had a number of shared values in each department and in each aspect of the organization. I was an industrial engineer and a time study engineer for them when I first started. Later became a plastics engineer for them. But one of their shared values was being at work all the time, working all day long, and dressing the part of your job. So for us in the industrial engineering department, we used to take our cues from our boss. My boss's name was Roman Katecki, and Roman used to always wear a shirt and tie and dress pants to work. And so all of us industrial engineers, that's what we wore to work. Of course, an industrial setting like we were in, where we had to go down onto the factory floor a number of different times a day, we all had to wear clip-on ties because you can't wear regular ties around machinery in case they get caught in the machinery. But other things like they expect you to be at work on time. And so if you miss 4 or 5 days of work a year, or were late 2 or 3 times a year, they considered you to be a chronic absentee problem, and they started to look for ways to get rid of you. And so one of the things that we learned very early on at that organization was to be in your seat we used to start at 7 a.m. Be in your seat at 7 a.m. Make sure you're there for the morning briefing, and make sure that, we used to finish work every day at 3:30. Make sure that you stayed well past 3:30 before you went home. That was all part of the corporate culture. Corporate cultures are important. They're important to understand, and that they're important for you as a new employee to navigate so that you can be successful. The other value in terms of doing a marketing plan is a corporate culture tends to lead to goals and objectives, and tends to lead to a better understanding of the internal workings of an organization. The next thing we'd like to address would be, of course, the willingness and ability to adapt to change. How willing is the organization to change when change is necessary? Some organizations are very good at adapting to change, and they have a culture of change, with new product ideas, with all kinds of ways to create new product ideas and new ways of doing things, new processing ideas, and those sorts of things. When I worked at Westclox, we were a fairly traditional company that was not particularly good at adapting to change. But as we went along, there was a number of programs that Westclox put into place to try to make us more agile and more willing to adapt to change as it came along. One of the funny things about Westclox was that our factory used to produce 20 million key-wound alarm clocks a year. Now, many of you don't even know what a key-wound alarm clock is, but it's an alarm clock that has a knob on the back, a key that you turn to wind up. So it doesn't need any electricity. You can take it camping with you, or you can take it on a trip with you, or whatever. But they were key-wound alarm clocks. And even when I got there in 1974, it seemed odd to me that we were making key-wound alarm clocks instead of electric alarm clocks. And we were making some electric alarm clocks, but a large percentage of our alarm clocks are still key-wound. And that was back in an era where people thought that being at work on time was really important. So even if they had an electric clock, they would typically also set a key-wound alarm clock as a backup, so that they would not sleep through an alarm, or if the electricity went off, their alarm wouldn't go off. But as time evolved, Westclox did not appear to be as willing to adapt to this change, and we just kept making key-wound alarm clocks, when of course we should have been investing a lot of time and money into other changes. That as the time really was going digital, we really were not on the forefront of that digital change in the way that time was kept. And so we were an organization that was not very good at adapting to change. So one of the things that we obviously want to do is we want to make sure that we understand how willing the organization is to adapt to change. The next thing that we'd like to know about, of course, is what is really important to the company. What's important to the organization? And on every organization is different. For some organizations, it's sales. And for many organizations, the key number it's called the top line number is sales. And so everyone's interested in what were our sales this quarter, this year, this week, this month, whatever it might be. We're interested in sales. Other organizations find that their emphasis is more on profits than sales. Other organizations are very focused on that the most important thing for their organization is image. For others, it's quality. For some, it's innovation. An example of innovation is an organization that is what I would consider to be sort of a classic business organization, 3M out of Minneapolis, always trying to emphasize in all of their communications that they focus on new innovations. And 3M is basically a tape company. So if you think about that, it's interesting that they have managed to really focus their organization on innovation. Or it could be something completely different than all of these. But it's important that we try to figure out what is important for the organization. Okay, we've already covered willingness to adapt to change. The next on here is how important is the business unit to the parent company. Now, in many businesses, the business is one part, the business that we would be working on for a marketing plan might be part of a larger organization. So if you think of the casino companies in town, so think about someone like MGM Resorts, and you could ask yourself, well, how important are each of the casinos to MGM Resorts? Or you could take a look at the Sands Company, which has recently been broken into pieces, and say, well, how important are the 2 casinos in Las Vegas to the Sands Corporation? And the answer, after the CEO and president of the company, Sheldon Ellison, passed away, was apparently for the rest of the company they were not as important because they were immediately sold. For them, it turns out that Macau was very important, and that the things in Las Vegas were important, but they weren't the most important thing for the parent company. And so, so if you're, so a question, if you're thinking about a part of the organization like a marketing plan for the Lee Business School, is how important is the Lee Business School to the university? Well, for example, it's very hard for any one of us to be able to name a top university in any metropolitan area that doesn't have a great business school. So if you go to some place like New York and you say, okay, well, what are the best universities in New York? 2 that immediately come to mind would be Columbia, which is, of course, an Ivy League school, and NYU. Both of those organizations have great business schools. How about Chicago? Well, the 2 schools that come to mind in Chicago as great universities in Chicago are Northwestern and the University of Chicago. And both of them have great business schools. And you go to Los Angeles, you say, well, what are the great, universities in the Southern California region? Well, the 2 that come to mind very quickly are UCLA and USC, both with great business schools. So I could make the argument that for schools that are in big metropolitan areas, the business school is a very, very important unit for the organization. That would be the way that you would try to analyze this. The next thing, of course, that we'd like to talk about would be previous results. And the reason that we're interested in previous results is because they're an indicator of what the organization is good at and what the organization is not as good at. And so one of the things that we might take a look at are sales. And of course, perhaps profits, sales per product line, profits per product line, and shares of the market. Now, when I worked at Westcox, we had many, many product lines, and we used to spend a lot of time trying to focus on creating sales for the product lines that we thought were the most profitable, and not spending as much time on the product lines that were less profitable, except every product typically has a purpose in the product line. So we'd like to know historically about sales. The other question you might want to ask yourself is, how does an organization measure its performance? How does an organization like UNLV measure its performance compared to a business? How does the business that you work for, how do they measure their performance? I have a number of students who work for Starbucks in one capacity or another. And the question that you might ask one of them is, well, for each individual Starbucks store, how do they measure their store's performance? And when you find the answer to that, you'll find what things are actually important for the organization. We're interested in past successes, and the reason we're interested in past successes is because that is an indicator of things that we're good at. So if we've been really good at having an online presence, then maybe we have a good social media department. On the other hand, we're also interested in past failures. And if you think about past failures, why would we be interested in past failures? Of course, the answer is that gives us an indication of things that we're probably not as good at. Now, sometimes a success or a failure is not predicated on how good we are. It's predicated on the timing of the situation, and sometimes it's predicated on the competition that we face in those situations. But it's important for us to identify past successes and past failures. And you might want to ask yourself the question, why? So in summary, the importance of these items and understanding the situation is critical. If and it's all about the argument that if you understand these aspects of the individual organization, then you have a good chance of beginning to put together a valuable and meaningful internal analysis.